بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق ونور عرش أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيبنا وسيدنا وسندنا وشفيعنا ومولانا بالقاسم محمد وعلى آل الطيبين الطاهرين المأسومين المظلومين. I begin in Allah's name, the Beneficent, the Merciful, and we're honored to have to continue these series of lectures from the Ramadan section. And inshallah, we'll phase out of this Ramadan spirit, to use the word in terms of the timing, and to continue, though, to maintain a higher trajectory of spirituality. And we are going to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to perfect for us our light. You know, when we say, Rabbana atmim lana nurana waghfir lana, our Lord, perfect for us our light and protect us. So we're going to continue this discussion, and Thursday nights, inshallah, will be dedicated to spiritual talk. And we're going to actually create special programs for Thursday nights, Friday nights, and Saturday nights. And each one will be a different kind of program, different setup, different layout, a different venue. But we will be having panelists also who will join us. I think it's important for us to continue having these discussions, because we are a society of people that, if we are not constantly reminded, as Allah says, فَذَكِّرْ إِن نَفَعَتِ الذِّكْرَ, remind them, reminding is beneficial. سَيَذَّكَّرُ مَن يَخْشَى, of course, the ones who are conscious of God will be the ones who will listen to you. And I find many a times our young generations growing up in societies, families have not given them outlets by which to plug into, to constantly receive spiritual talk. That is why I love communities that have routine programs where the community constantly goes into those facilities, and they have Dua Kumail on Thursday night. Like tonight, inshallah, after our presentation, we will play the Dua Kumail, for example. It's very important for us to get involved spiritually, because when we involve ourselves spiritually, what we're doing is we are engaging ourselves in a connection. Just like salah. If you think about it, you know, when Allah says, Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar wa la dhikrullahi akbar, prayer indeed keeps you away from wrongdoing and evil, and it is a great form of remembrance. Why is it a great form of remembrance? Because plugging in, you know, 3 times a day for 5 daily prayers, or 5 times a day for 5 daily prayers, what it does is it keeps us in check, and we're constantly reminded of our purposes in life. And of course, not only does it keep us in check, but it also elevates us spiritually. We find that when we do say our prayers with understanding and realization of what we're actually doing, then the chances of us doing wrong, cheating, lying, stealing, you know, harming others reduces, because we become much more God conscious. And I think that's extremely important for us to get involved in. So these dialogues are designed for us to get more spiritual upliftment. And Thursdays, to me, is very important. It's, you know, we say, they call it Shab Jum'ah, the night of Jum'ah, as they call it in other languages. You know, Laylatul Jum'ah, in other words, the night of Jum'ah. You find that from the riwayat, the spirits of those who have left us, who have gone before us into Barzakh, come and visit us on Thursday nights. As you know, Friday is a very holy day for Muslims. And Allah says, إِذَا نُودِيَ لِلصَّلَاةِ مِنْ يَوْمِ الْجُمْعَةِ فَاسْعَوْا إِلَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَذَرُوا الْبَيْعَ. You know, when prayer is called on Friday, go and pray and follow. It's better, you know, than all the trade and tijara that we get involved in. So Thursday night for us is actually the beginning of Friday, once sun sets. And I think it's very important for us to indulge in spiritual talk. I say that Thursday night, of course, spirituality is a 24/7 kind of endeavor, but allocation from a social perspective, where the community comes in and sort of focuses together and sits and reads dua, and now, of course, from a virtual perspective too, is very important. I've seen myself go away from my spirituality when I don't plug into these kinds of programs. I feel that the world sucks me into its black hole, and then I find myself indulgent in material things that don't give me the kind of tranquility that I should be getting. Because at the end of the day, if I lack tranquility within my heart, then no matter how much possession I have, no matter how much material success I have, I will not be a happy person. And when we're not happy, we become ill, we cause harm on others, etc., etc. And it becomes constant forms of degradation. And we agree that the minute we get into spiritual talk and we ground ourselves and understand the purpose of life and we grow with that, what it does for us is that it takes us closer to Allah spiritually, but we also become more productive and socially become much more amicable. For the world starts to love us more because we become more magnetic because of the fact that we're more patient, we're more caring, sharing, loving, giving, and forgiving. So these are the reasons why I think it's very important for us to always maintain a relationship at the spiritual level in a communal setting, at least once a week, if not more. So if there's a local community out there that is offering Dua Kumail programs, and I know some members of our community have a very consistent, what we call calendar, a fashion of lifestyle by which they don't compromise on those sessions. I think that's extremely good because you can see the long-term effects of their children. You will see that they tend to become much more God conscious and they tend to do more good than evil. So as an introduction to this conversation, inshallah, we're blessed to have today Brother Hussein Sharara and of course Sister Barak Hussein from Ottawa. And Brother Hussein, as you know, is local. And of course, Brother Amil, who's going to be moderating this. And we're going to talk about how to maintain this spirituality post-Ramadan. Sometimes we feel exhausted. Sometimes we feel that we're moving away from that kind of diligence that we had when we were fasting. What is it that we need to do by which, on a very basic level, that we have this insatiable desire, this thirst for constancy in wanting to connect spiritually? I will just introduce a verse in the Quran when Allah in Surah Al-Ahzab said, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ وَذَكَّرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a beautiful sentence in the Quran where he says, indeed in your messenger, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ, in the messenger is your best example. Uswatun hasana, best example, best role model, one who you should focus on, you should constantly reflect on. Like he's your hero, you want to dress, talk, walk, sleep, do everything like this hero. Uswatun hasana. But Allah gives a condition that when will this happen? Allah says, لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهِ, for the one who has the desire to return to God. Now here, to return to God doesn't mean to return by death, but constancy to return to Allah, even at the spiritual level. لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ. They have this clear understanding and certainty. وَبِالْآخِرَةِ هُمْ يُوقِنُونَ. See, لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ. Day of judgment, you know it's coming. It's like tomorrow. You've planned for it, you're preparing for it. Okay, so you're saying, لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ. And the last piece, Allah says, وَذَكَّرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. And they do much remembrance. Now, dhikr here means conversation, social, meditation, introspection, retrospection. All of these factors that we get involved in is part of dhikr, on the condition that it is done for a good reason. So if we're going to indulge in any talk, it should be for a good reason, not for vain talk, not for fault finding, not for backbiting, but rather we should get involved in good talk, talk that will enhance my knowledge, talk that will take me closer to Allah, talk that will stop me from doing wrong, talk that will encourage me to do more good. These are all factors that we have to get very much close to when it comes to dhikr. So dhikr here is not only praying the 5 daily prayers, but dhikr is meditating, reflecting, reading Quran, conversing, etc., all for a good cause, to improve ourselves, so that by the nighttime, when we go into bed, we're thinking of that day and we say, did we produce something good? And of course, as you know, we just celebrated Eid al-Fitr and we said Eid Mubarak to all of you. Why was Eid there? It's a beautiful example, as we've mentioned before. Eid al-Fitr is when you're doing Eid, you're celebrating and returning to your fitrah. And fitrah has this natural, desire to be submissive to God. And as a result, each day, Imam Ali alayhi salam says that you don't commit sins, it is Eid. and celebrate that day. So when we go to sleep and we're retrospecting and introspecting at night, say, what did I do today? What was the highlight of my day? And if you feel that you've been productive that day, that you've earned halal living, you didn't get into brawls and altercations and fights with people, and you didn't cheat anyone, you didn't lie to anyone, rather you actually dispensed some money towards charity, or you gave good words to people, and you put a smile on somebody's face, for example, that's all form of dhikr. وَذَكَرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. And inshallah, we'll continue this dialogue on how we can actually look at that. And Sister Barak is a mental health expert, so I think it's excellent that we can talk about these kinds of issues. And Brother Hussein is now also involved himself in a lot of life coaching scenarios, and he's impacting lots of lives in the world and talking about issues on how to address this. And inshallah, we'll get involved in this conversation in a fruitful way. So Brother Amel, inshallah, he'll take over and we'll continue.
Inshallah. Thank you, Brother Hassanain, for that introduction on, trying to maintain the spirit of Ramadan and trying to keep our spirits alive. There's a lot to say, but I'll mention just some brief comments, inshallah, before we bring Brother Hussein and Sister Barak also on. Recently I came across a very interesting story about a man called Archie Williams. And Archie Williams, for those who don't know, he actually recently performed on, the show America's Got Talent. And I was reading his story, and it was honestly, his story was so mind-boggling, and it really fit in with this discussion that we're having on, keeping our spirits high. And I was reading into his story, and he says that in 2019, he was released from prison after spending 37 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Okay, I want us to just think and ponder on that for a second, that this man spent 37 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. He was put in prison when he was 22 years old as a young African-American man for the rape and murder of a white woman, despite the fact, by the way, that none of his fingerprints matched the crime scene. And he had several witnesses that testified that he was at home during the time of the murder, but someone, had to take the fall for this murder. And so as a young, poor Black man that doesn't have the resources to fight, he was thrown in prison. And you want to talk about systemic racism, it's here. Just as this week we had with the horrific story of the African-American brother, George Floyd in Minnesota, who lost his life because of a reckless officer that kept, pinning his knee onto his neck while he's pinned to the ground. And he's repeatedly complaining and pleading that he can't breathe. But, unfortunately, he loses his life because of this, this police brutality. But talking about systemic racism and the story of this man, Archie Williams. So he goes to prison for 37 years. And in 2019, finally, new DNA evidence is recovered that shows that he was not at the crime scene. So after 37 years, he's freed from prison. So they asked him in this interview, and this is the point I want to highlight, that how did you survive 37 years in prison? 37 years in prison for a crime you did not commit. How did you survive? What kept you going? And what he said was so profound, I want to share. And I'm quoting verbatim his words. He said, when they asked him, how did you survive these 37 years in prison? He says, freedom is of the mind. I went to prison, but I did not let my mind go to prison. And I thought that statement was just so profound. He says, I did not let my mind go to prison. Freedom is of the mind. Malcolm X, same principle he followed. When he was sent to prison, he refused to be a victim. He kept his spirits up. He decided he's going to improve his reading and writing skills. So he picks up a dictionary and he begins copying the dictionary hand by hand, word by word, page by page. He begins reading all of the books in the library of the prison, right? Science books, fiction books, philosophy books. And then he himself says that despite the fact that I was in prison, after I began this process of enhancing my knowledge, I had never been so truly free in my life. So oftentimes it's not about the circumstances we are in. It's about us refusing to be victims to the situations that we are put in. The same way Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam, right? In fact, Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam himself chose to go to prison. That, oh my Lord, I prefer prison to what these people are inviting me towards. And he goes to prison and he refuses to be a victim. He goes to the prison. He starts cleaning. He starts making those around him believers. This is the kind of maintaining of high spirits we're talking about, that no matter what situation I'm put in, I always maintain high spirits because I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with me. And by the way, one final point, this man, Archie Williams, that was sent to prison for 37 years, he mentions that, when I went through dark times in the prison throughout these 37 years, when I went through dark times, two things kept me going. They said, what are these two things? He said, number one, prayer, connecting to God, having hope in God. هو الذي أنزل السكينة في قلوب المؤمنين ليزدادوا إيمانا مع إيمانهم ولله جنود السماوات والأرض وكان الله عليما حكيما. That it is Allah who sends sakina, tranquility, peace into the hearts of the believers, adding to their faith. ليزدادوا إيمانا مع إيمانهم وَلِلَّهِ جُنُودُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And to Allah belongs the host of the heavens and the earth, and surely He is the knowledgeable and the wise. So this is what the type we're talking about, the maintaining of high spirit. So he says, my number one, just to finish that story, that the two things that kept me going in prison when I went through dark times was, number one, was prayer, connecting to God, never losing hope in God, right? قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Oh, you, those who have wronged themselves, do not lose hope in the mercy of God. Don't have ya'as. And he says, number two, he says singing. And he mentioned singing because that was a passion of his. And so he says, anytime I would feel down, I would engage in prayer and engaging in my passion of singing. I think there's a lot to learn from this story, right? That when you and I are in down times, in order to maintain our spirits high, these are two important things. One, connecting with God because He is the one who brings peace into our hearts, and then engaging in our passions, right? Whatever those passions may be, as long as they are in line with the commandments of God, we engage in those passions. And you find eventually the Innocence Project, just to wrap up the story of this man, the Innocence Project takes up his case in 2019, and they find evidence that shows that he wasn't at the crime scene. And so they release him, right? After 37 years, they release him. And then he comes on America's Got Talent, by the way, to perform. And he mentions, I think Brother Hussein will enjoy this part of the story because I know this is something he likes to talk about. Inshallah, he'll jump in here as well. That he mentions that when he was in prison for 37 years, he used to watch the show America's Got Talent, and he would visualize himself being on stage. He says he would visualize himself while he was in prison, being on stage and performing on stage. And 37 years, those years went by, right? 37 years in prison, and finally he comes out, he's a free man, and he fulfills that dream, that visualization he had of performing on stage. So I think this is just a beautiful story I want to share of how you and I, despite the circumstances, can say, no, I refuse to be a victim, and I engage in remembrance of God, engage in my passions to maintain my spirits and keep my spirits high. Alhamdulillah, as we mentioned, we have Sister Barak also joining us today to participate in this discussion. We also have Brother Hussein Charara joining us today to participate in this discussion as well. Brother Hussein, why don't you jump in here? I talked a lot about maintaining our spirits and the practice of, visualizing things in the mind. And I know these are things that you really like to talk about and you're passionate about. So why don't you jump in here and share some thoughts, please?
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Ahmad. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. All praise be to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. May His peace and blessings be on our beloved Prophet and His Immaculate Ahlul Bayt. Salawat. So you talked about Archie Williams, and if you know what he actually did, is he asked himself a question. Hajj Hassanain spoke about it earlier. If you want to know where the reason why people don't get certain things, or why they get bored, or why things are not manifesting, is because they're not asking questions. Like even the people listening right now, if you don't ask your questions, 3 fundamental questions: why is you listening right now? How will this help me? And when will I use it? Most people, if you listen to something for an hour, after 1 hour, you forget 50% of it. After a day, you're going to forget all of it. So how do you retain information is you ask the right questions. And unfortunately, most of us don't ask questions. I actually asked the right question. That's why he said, how am I going to be able to survive this? And he used music, and he used the power of prayer. Well, other people have done it in prison, where they've been in prison illegally. One person envisioned golf. He never golfed. And the golf course that he envisioned every day, he ended up doing like almost a perfect handicap score, even though he never played on the course. People with chess, they would envision it every day. So you would have to ask yourselves, what are the questions that you ask? How do we get into blues? This is called the Ramadan Blues. It's because we haven't asked the question. If you don't ask questions of where you're going, there's the faster method that I'll explain really shortly. But if you don't ask the questions of, how is this useful, then you're stuck with the questions of the past, which is your familiar past, and you're stuck with the same routine. So Ramadan came and went, and if you go back to the same routine, then you're going to go to the same back reality. Well, how do you change that? You ask the right questions. And when people have done that in life, that's where their life has changed. Quran has filled there's ayahs of the Quran that are filled with questions. Allah is questioning us, saying, you doubt me? You were once a thing that clings, where you could barely be seen, and now you're given this existence. You think I'm going to leave you? Not only am I not going to leave you, it's going to come in the most unexpected ways. And I think my life changes when I started asking questions about my existence. Where am I going? Will this make me happy? I started asking dominant questions. We do this book club, and there was this brother, because the Hajj Hassanain said, ask the question. Imam Ali says, was a good day? It was because it's Eid if you didn't sin. Well, you have to ask yourself, did you sin? And if you don't ask that, then you can't reflect on that. So Imam Ali alayhi salam says, if you want to know where your heart is, and you want to be able to answer questions, so I believe in giving tips. And we do this all the time with people. And so Imam Ali's suggestion was, just allow yourself to do nothing. See where your mind wanders. Just take 20 seconds, let your mind wander. And wherever it wanders to, Imam Ali says, that's where your heart is. And then you have to ask the question, is that where your heart is that where you would like your heart to be? So we did this yesterday with a brother who was a recovering addict within our book club. He's a recovering addict. He dealt with all types of drug addictions. Now he's married, has a beautiful family, a 6-figure job. He's been manifesting a lot. And so I asked him, I said, when you were wandering, when your mind was wandering, when you were an addict, where did your mind go? He said, my mind went to deceive people so I could get money, to rob people's houses. I said, now where does your mind go? He says, now my mind is in data analysis because I want to become a programmer. And I said, that's the key. So right now, if your mind wanders to, let's say, cheating on somebody or hurting somebody or manipulating somebody, you really have to now question your desires and saying, will that really make me happy? And then you would really have to say, okay, now what are the really good questions that I need to ask myself to get myself out of this state? And we follow the FASTER method. It's an acronym where when you're listening to something or reading something, first thing you want to do is forget your past beliefs. Suspend them for a minute, let it go. And then the A is the act. How are you acting towards something that you're trying to understand? Then there's the most important, which is your state. What state are you in right now? As you're listening right now to this lecture, what state are you in? Why is our school a failing system? Because when you ask most students, what state were you in when you were learning? They said, I was bored. I wasn't happy. And now if you're in a state of boredom and now you're trying to learn, why is that happening? Because we're not asking the right questions. How is this useful? When will I use it? And why am I going to use it? Who are the best students? The ones that have those fundamental questions set. Now, if they're in calculus, now if they're in trigonometry, even if courses that they don't like, they're going to flourish because they have the fundamental questions answered. If you don't ask those questions, then you will not flourish. It's impossible. There's a lady there was a brother. He said he came to me in despair and suicidal thoughts, all types of issues. And I said, what do you want to do? I said, have you asked the question of how you're going to get out of here? He said, well, how do I do that? I said, well, envision yourself where you want to be. He says, well, I want to be, working for a certain job, and this is where I want to be, and so on. I said, okay, now let your mind wander, like Imam Ali see where it goes. He said, man, I was going to despair. So I had to fight those thoughts, and I let the mind talk to the heart, saying where it wants to go. And as soon as I did that, I started getting the vision of Cadillac coming. I said, well, Allah says whatever comes, it's going to come unexpected. So I said, whatever your solution is, it's got something to do with Cadillac. He said, okay. Soon after that, 2 or 3 days later, he said, it was the greatest day of my life. I got my dream job. And I had to lose that job, get out of my heart of despair, and then I got the best job I could ever dream for. And he said, here's the interesting thing, because I'm working from home because of COVID, I'm going to pick up the laptop, and I go and pick it up from the Cadillac building. Well, how do you go from an addict of despair to having a dream job? Is you ask the right question. And that's what Hajj Hassanain alluded to. That's what I did. My life changes when I asked the right question to myself about 12 years ago. I said, I'm going to an entrepreneur, I'm going into real estate, I'm going into computer science. And I would go and ask the question to people that were 10 years ahead of me, are you happy? And I realized none of them were happy. I said, I don't want this. And then I realized, okay, I asked the question, what would make me happy? And I threw it out there. And then somebody came and whispered in my ear, you need to go and listen to this lecture. I ignored it, but that was the answer. So then when I was sitting down to go out with my friends, the question, somebody whispered in my ear and said, you need to go and listen to this person. And when I listened to that, because that was the answer to my question, that's when my life changed. Brother Ahmed?
Your audio is off.
Yeah, sorry. A lot of thoughts were going through my head when you were talking that. But inshallah, we'll engage. But just a Barak, I want to make sure, inshallah, you'll share some introductory thoughts before we continue.
Sorry.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Wonderful to see you again. And a belated Eid Mubarak to every one of you and to all of our viewers, inshallah, who are joining us, inshallah. Despite the pandemic, you're still able to celebrate. And as we've learned, every day is Eid if we can stay away from sin, right? And so that's part of, I guess, how we can continue with the spirituality. And we always talk about the postpartum depression of something. And so I guess we're somewhat experiencing that. A lot of people posted about it and commented and shared that. And as I was listening to everybody, and it coincided with a lot of the thoughts I had on the topic as well. And Brother Amel, you were talking about the brother that was in jail for a long time. And it reminded me of a huge influencer on my work getting into this field when I was a young psych student, Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, if you've heard of him. And he's a psychiatrist and a neurologist who had over 39 books published, and one of his most famous books was called Man's Search for Meaning. Now, as a young psych student, I was always trying to find something religious related to psychology, and it was very separate. It didn't quite exist until I delved into the world of Dr. Viktor Frankl and humanistic psychology, existential psychology, where it included spirituality and religion. And through the research that he did while he was imprisoned, he found some fascinating results that his worldview was, depending on how the prisoner viewed themselves, it impacted their longevity and their survival. And so he talked about, in terms of men's search for meaning around suffering, well, while you're in jail and imprisoned, and as well as in life. So subhanAllah, we have the ability to find meaning in our suffering. And this is a concept, again, as a young Muslim psych student, I connected to that, especially as somebody who adhered to the followings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. I really connected with that idea, and especially to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, Sayyida Zainab, and it just made sense to me when I was researching him. And he also discussed that the people who survived the concentration camps had something to live for. And that included love, a loved one to look forward to seeing and yearning to be with them. And most importantly out of this, and this is something we can all connect with, is the prisoner's connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When the prisoner was not afraid of anything else, just God, and put their faith in God and had something to live for through God, these are the ones that survived and did not wither away, because a lot of people had died withering away in the camps. And we know this in other situations like that. And of course, other than the ones that were murdered and killed, the idea is the ones who survived had something to live for, and it did involve their belief in God. That was very profound as a young psych student for me to explore even further. And when I got into my graduate studies, alhamdulillah, I wanted to develop this further and research this further. And then my professor in theories class said, no, you're going to go research Islamic counseling, which is non-existent right now. So I delved into that till now, alhamdulillah. And so the idea here of it's God consciousness that can give you the power of survival, whether it's in a difficult situation to help you in survival mode, but even afterwards, when you're not in survival mode, being in that God consciousness. And I use that a lot, depending, of course, on the client that I have in front of me and how we use that in our lives and spiritually being connected. Now, if we delve a little bit further into this idea of what could it mean to be God consciousness from, let's say, well-being, mental health point of view, it's around gratitude. And this is a concept that we're very well versed in from an Islamic perspective, in terms of being thankful and grateful and practicing gratitude daily. So how can we keep up, let's say, our spirituality after the blessed month of Ramadan? Is perhaps engaging and continuing in some of the things that made us feel good throughout the month to continue all year long. We can continue. Why is it all of a sudden when the month is over, we stop giving so generously to certain charities and the people that are, you know what, they're still in need all year long, not just during the holy month. Perhaps this is an act that we can continue throughout the whole year. We feel good because altruistically, when you help somebody, you feel good, but you're doing something to help another person. Second, could we not continue certain perhaps spiritual acts that we had done throughout the month that we can continue? I was reading something that Brother Sayyid Hassan Mekki had shared the other day that really stuck with me, and I really liked it. And he said to challenge yourself with something to continue for 40 days after the Shahr Ramadan. Whether it's a dua, whether it's an act, whether it's reading Ziyarat Ashura, reading continuously from the Quran, challenge yourself. Anything, continue it for 40 days. Why don't we continue in something like that? What is it that you really enjoyed during this holy month that you've been doing more often that you can perhaps continue in your daily lives, right?
Let me jump in, Sister Barak, just a quick, I want to ask you a tough question.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, what you said is profound. The 40 days, very, very important. And then inshallah, Brother Hussein, you can jump in too. You have a client, somebody comes to you and says, you know what, let's look at the Holocaust, right? There were two groups of people, the ones who sort of gave up and they died, right? And then the ones who sort of stuck with it and they got out of the Holocaust and then they lived for another 50 years, let's say 40 years, right? How do you deal with a person who comes and says to you, well, I find greater happiness in giving up.
Right.
I don't see a reason to continue, because even if I survive this, life is full of so many hurdles that if I survive this Holocaust, I may live a nightmare. And maybe I don't want to live this nightmare. Maybe I just want to let go. And you have somebody like that talking to you, and I'm sure you've had clients like that, right? Who look at, because we have taken this assumption that the continuity of life and to have hope to grow further and to do more good is the driving force as to why I want to live. And maybe let's say if I was, let's say, that person, I say, look, your vision is worldly and your vision is here to continue to reap something good on this earth. But I feel that there is nothing more for me. I really want to go to God. I'm done. I want to leave this world. How would you approach pragmatically to analyze this person's mind and to give them a direction by which to value this world at a level where in other words, the maxim would be, sure, when God decides to take us now or 1,000 years from now, let it happen.
Right.
But we don't know that. So in that process, what sort of a mindset should you and I have? Should you and I have a desire that God should take my life right now? Or should you and I have a desire to say, if God gives me another week, I'm going to be productive. Gives me another 10 years, I'm going to be productive. Or if he takes it tonight, I'm going to be productive.
That is indeed a tough question. And I'm going to have to dissect that into a few parts. Something that struck me immediately when you said is within there is the part about God. So somebody who is very God conscious wouldn't actually come out and say that, although we do have Muslim and people of different faiths who do come and are very much aware of God, but are very overwhelmed by life and just feel that they want to give up. And so it's a process. I don't have an instant answer, but it's a process that we work through with the client.
Yeah. So what I want from you is that professional. Let's say I'm a client who walked in.
All right, let's role play then.
Very, very negative. I've got a very negative outlook.
Right.
Life has no meaning to me.
Talk to me like you're a client, Hajj. So we'll do a role play.
Look, you're telling me that I should have a future and so on. Okay, my future is to end this world and move on to the next world.
So do you adhere to faith-based type of
Yeah, so I
work?
believe in God.
You connect with that. You believe in God.
I believe in God, but I'm tired of this world.
Okay. So how do you
Really.
talk to God then? How do you talk to God when you are in these deep
Oh, I talk to him. I tell him I love you. I want to be with you.
Okay. But what if he has a different plan for you right now? What if he doesn't want you to come right now?
Well,
What
but
if he,
yeah, that's what I want you to tell me. What's the other plan?
well, I can't give you the exact plan, but we can certainly work on looking at something that drives you. For example, what is worth living for you? Would you actually want to take your life? Is that something you would actually do?
No, I wouldn't want to take my life. I think that would be encroaching on suicide. And
Okay.
of course that, we can discuss that, because that has factors. There are people who are suicidal who've
Are
completely
you Hajj right
validated.
now or Hajj client right now?
Well, I'm sort of going between the two. So
Going back to two,
when I
okay.
put on my client hat, I'll tell you for a second.
Okay, got
Well,
it.
I'm saying in general, if I have my outlook in life is so pessimistic,
Mhm.
where pessimism is my way. And while you tell me it's great, to be spiritual and so on, but I've sort of validated my pessimism by putting God into the equation. And since God says, liman kana yarjullah, the one who wants to return to God, then you know what? That's what I want.
And so we talk about an individual's journey. It's going to be very different as to what, let's say, what you planned. And yes, like we talked about earlier, envisioning and living, working towards that vision and that mission that you have. It's a difficult situation to work through with somebody, right? Because we are coming from the angle of wanting that person to see life worth living, a life worth living for, and
Right.
what to live for. Usually people will look at, let's say, family, right? They wouldn't want to take their lives because their families, or they would want to live longer to connect with their family. So something that would connect them more. Yes, it's worldly, but a part of them does want to. You hear this often, let's say, with a lot of people who've lived a full life and say, I'm done. Sometimes you hear our parents are like, I'm just done with this world. I don't care with the
Right.
grandkids or anything. I just want to meet my Lord. And you hear this kind of rhetoric and this narrative.
Yeah.
And
But
it's not necessarily depressive. It's not necessarily depressive, but it's somebody who's like, Alhamdulillah, I'm good. I'm interested in going to the next life. But so as a counselor, I'm not going to go there and try to change their mind, so to speak, unless it's going to be suicidal. If this is their way of thinking, then we have to respect that. We can't change their pessimism unless they're coming and saying, I'm so negative, I'm hurting a lot of people with my negativity. And yes, I've had some negativity.
But from your professional position, can you make a pessimist into an optimist who still thinks they're a pessimist?
You make a pessimist an optimist who still thinks they're,
let's say my mindset is pessimism.
right.
Can you change me to be optimistic in my actions, but I still believe I'm a pessimist?
If that's the way that you choose to go, I can't do anything.
No, I'm saying as a professional, can you?
Yeah. We can work on the process of somebody eventually getting to the point of having a different perception. But if this is the way they choose to go about it, a counselor can't change that unless that person wants to change and work with that. But if there's a constant block, no perfect counselor, no amount of expertise on the face of the earth is going to change that person's mentality if they don't acknowledge and they don't admit, and if they're in denial. So if they're not going to work with that, nobody's going to change them except themselves.
Well, that's a given. That's a given. Right. What we're talking more about is from your professional position or from a person who's influencing somebody else.
Right.
One of the tools you mentioned was the fact that you take you when you're talking to this person, you're looking at a worldly matter that this person still holds on to, that they see value in this worldly existence, right? Mm-hmm. And then you bring that out and you put it on the table and say, okay, how important is it for you to continue to feed this worldly matter compared to what you told me that you want to leave the world? Say, for example, let's take a quick example, and the brother was saying, if you can jump in too, is let's say a person like Anthony Bourdain, right? Assuming he committed suicide. Some argue that he was, maybe he didn't commit suicide, but assuming he did. And a person like him, right, highly successful, but he's got a young daughter, right? And you say, okay, you bring the daughter on the table, in a picture or an idea, and say, okay, here, this is your daughter. Your daughter will be without you if you leave this world. Your daughter will miss you. Your daughter needs da 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 da. You bring all these qualities forward and say, well, these are essential as part of our existence on this earth. That is going to be given up now, should you have this pessimistic notion of returning to Allah prematurely. And here what we're talking about is, and the big distinction here that we have to make constantly is that when God decides to take us, it's never premature, it's on time.
Right.
Any other choices prior to that, I would argue, is premature.
So when we're specifically talking about suicide and somebody who has it all, so to speak, and so much to live for, does end up taking their lives, this is when we talk about they were mentally unwell, right? And so this is an illness altogether, where I think the scenario you're describing is vastly different than when somebody does want to take or does take their life because they are plagued by illnesses. And then I see this all the time with clients who come to me and say, my father took his life. We had no idea that he was this unwell. But this person struggled and struggled for years and protected their children. But in the end, the pain was so overwhelming emotionally. People end up hurting themselves physically or taking their lives because the emotional pain becomes so much, too much to handle. And so this, again, we're veering in the territory of illness. Because it's very tricky from an Islamic point of view, right? We know to take your life is haram. It's a black and white thing. To kill others is a black and white thing. But then now we're coming into illnesses. And I've discussed this with scholars when I've had to deal with it in my work and Muslim and clients of different faiths. How do we wrap our mind around this? How do we discuss what's the narrative here, the language? And the conclusion of these discussions did come back to that this person is ill, then they are not necessarily committing a sin. Right? We can't obviously be the judge of that, but
we're not passing a judgment on that, and we're not saying that that's a haram act.
Yes.
You've emphasized illness, and the way I'm reading it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you've basically, the way you've presented it is almost like there's a red line. The word is called illness. Now we can't touch this person. So whatever direction this person goes, let it be. And I have a problem with that. Because what you're saying is that I cannot talk to this person, and you're alluding to the idea that if it's an illness, it's somehow chemically oriented, pain oriented, and there is nothing to mitigate that pain. There's nothing to mitigate that illness, and as a result, the consequences of whatever appears as a result of that is outside of our control. Or what you're actually saying, which I think is what you're saying is the second part, that should somebody take their life due to an illness, then we should suspend our judgments in quote unquote calling it a suicide, which was intended to be. Brother Hussein, what do you say to that?
Brother Hussein, you just had to turn your mic on again.
From the suicide point of view, there's 4 factors. Usually when you're suicidal, there's something wrong with the brain, right? There's the biological, the psychological, there's the social, who you hang out with, and the most important, the spiritual. But leave that alone. When people have come to me, let's say prostitutes or people with broken marriages or people that have hit huge despair, like she talked about Viktor Frankl, it's one of my most favorite books. Well, he gave himself meaning. When somebody goes into that despair, it's because they lack meaning. Imam Hussein alayhi salam had ultimate meaning. The Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam had the ultimate meaning. What happens with us is we lack meaning. So people who have come to me who have actually lost their lives because they couldn't get out of that mold. That's what Sister Barak, you cannot change someone who doesn't want to change themselves. Well, what do we do? What does the Prophet ﷺ try to do it 10,000 times better? Because even the Prophet couldn't change lives. He just could come and warn people, right? Well, what did he do? He gave people meaning. He gave people an understanding of what their potentials are. And as soon as they tapped into that, and they just did it once, it could be, one meditation where the next day something happens and it manifests. You're like, wow, look at how Allah's mercy, and helping people and encouraging people. Look, it happened to me. I was going through, I was reading about Cambodian women. They went through huge despair. Their husbands were beheaded. Their kids kept being thrown against trees. So much trauma that they lost vision. because now we know you can actually rebuild your neurons. Back then, they thought you couldn't. Well, they saved them. America came in, saved them, put them in Northern California. And many of them got their sight back. How? Through meditation and counseling. They were able to get their sight back. Some of them,
they wanted that. They wanted the therapy. Yeah.
And they asked the right questions.
Right.
Why do I want it? Why should I be healed? And they healed. So then I asked the question. I said, I want to meet somebody like this that was able to heal themselves and that they went blind through trauma. So I went through an issue at work. There was a problem and I'm being interviewed. And the lady says, this is not a big deal. I went through, I was once blind. I said, did you go blind through trauma? She's like, yeah, how'd you know? I said, well, you could see now? She said, yeah. I said, were you able to see through meditation? She goes, yeah, the doctor says it was impossible. Well, what did she do? She gave herself meaning. She says, I was in despair. I lost my job. I lost my pension because Detroit went bankrupt and I was in complete despair. Then somebody talked to me, encouraged me, and they gave me my meaning back. As soon as that happened, my attention was put elsewhere, because where your attention goes, energy flows. Just like the addict yesterday. He was suicidal. He was robbing houses, but he gave himself a new meaning. Now he's got a beautiful wife, beautiful family, beautiful job. He changed his meaning. Imam Hussein alayhi salam is the ultimate meaning. The Prophet Muhammad is the ultimate meaning of taking the representation towards Allah. And my recommendation, read 40 hadith number 15. It tells the believer how to look at this world. Because unfortunately, we look at this world where our top priority is certainty, our top priority is significance. And if those are your top priorities, I could pretty much lay out the rest of your life and you're going to end up miserable. And I could share so many. There was a lady, I'll share this quick story. She was miserable. She would go to all these houses in Texas in the ghetto. Nobody could read. But she couldn't afford books for them. And she was sad. So then she said, why am I sad? I need to be more encouraged. I have God on my side. Within 2 days, she gets a call to go and look. There's an alarm that went off in this huge building. She goes into the building. The person says it's a false alarm. She goes, well, I got to check everything anyway. So she goes from one room to another. She opens up the light. She sees all these books. She says, what are you going to do with these books? She says, oh, I'm about to throw them all out. She says, can I have them? Well, 2 days ago, she asked the right question. 2 days later, she got the right books. Unfortunately, people who come in despair, they ask the wrong questions. They give limiting thoughts. I'm no good. I'm going to die. God, just take me. What else could I do on this earth? And unless somebody could come and encourage, either through their own thoughts or something else, that's why we have these discussions, is to really question. And the three fundamentals, and I'll bring it back. How, if you're listening, how will I use this? When will I use it? And why? And if you don't have those three questions, then this is just talk and it'll never be used. And eventually that's where despair could come. That's why it's so important. That's why, Hajj, you said, at the end of the day, ask yourself a question. How was your day? And that's Imam Khomeini's advice to us all. And that's how your life changes. That's how my life changed.
Bro, I was saying, you brought up about the importance of thinking about giving yourself meaning. You talked about logotherapy that Viktor Frankl talks about.
Viktor Frankl,
right?
He created it.
And you talked about, asking yourself the right questions. And you talked about, when you were talking about asking yourself the right questions, the hadith Imam alayhi salam kept just playing in my head, Rahimallah imra'in arafa min ayn wa fi ayn wa ila ayn. That may Allah's mercy be on the individual who has answered for himself where he's come from, where he is, where he's going. Where he is, where he came from, where he's going. Because when you answer these three questions, you give yourself vision in life. You give yourself meaning. Because if you don't know where you came from, then you might think, oh, well, life is an accident. I have no purpose. If you're not going back to God, then why be good? Just go nihilism. If you don't know what your purpose is here, ad-dunya mazra'ut al-akhirah, that this dunya is, the world is like a plantation for the hereafter. If you don't have these meanings, then of course your life has no meaning. So I think what you mentioned about, asking yourself the right questions, this hadith on a macro level for governing our life was beautiful about alayhi salam. But I was saying, one thing I want you to, inshallah, to address also is, we talked about asking ourselves the right questions that Hussein brought up, and we talked about giving ourselves meaning. Of course, at a macro level, we know we should ask ourselves, why do I exist? Where am I working towards? But on a day-to-day practical level, what are some questions that you and I can ask ourselves to give ourselves meaning, to give ourselves motivation, to bring ourselves out of apathy?
I could give you one I shared yesterday real quick, and then you guys could jump in. It could be day-to-day basis. Like there's a book called Limitless. It teaches you how to learn. It's a book that's a gateway to other books. It teaches you how to pay attention, read faster, and so on. So he's the top brain expert. His name is Jim Quick. And he was invited to Will Smith, and he's talking to Will Smith about asking the right questions. It was at 3 o'clock in the morning. Everybody was up. And Will Smith said, I never thought about that. He says, right now, I want to make this a magical experience for everybody. How am I going to do that? That was his question at 3 o'clock in the morning, because everybody had to sit up for the next 3 hours. And he did. He said, a barbecue, he made everybody laugh. He made it a magical experience. Well, what did he do? He asked the right question at that moment. So it doesn't have to be just one question for the rest of your life. It's constantly asking yourself questions. And sometimes suspending beliefs. You suspend the belief about something, then you ask the question. Hajj Hassanain is great at that. He'll suspend the belief and dissect it in and out before he gets accepted. And that's one thing I've tried to learn from, how to do the same. But I think just asking that right question at moment to moment, like right now, how is this beneficial? Right now, somebody texts you, how is this going to impact me for my future? You do it on a day. When you keep, the Quran is filled, it keeps questioning us. Why don't you believe? Look at the earth. Look at that. We've created everything in harmony. What are you doing? Prophets ask questions all the time. What do? Is we don't. The first thing that we do is we check our WhatsApp, we brush our teeth, we go to the bathroom, and we create the same life over and over. That's why we created this. This is the blues. We get back in the blues because it's the same routine. So if your personality is your personal reality, and you're doing the same thing, complaining about the same things, then you're gonna have the same reality. Well, how do you break that? Is ask those magical questions. How did Hajj's life change? If you were to ask him, he says, he said, I asked the right questions.
You know, sister, in our dialogue we had, Sister Hafsa made a very good point. I think we all sort of resonated. She said somebody told her, connect before you correct.
Yes.
Right? Connect before you correct. And that's exactly what you're saying, Brother Hussein, is that ask the right questions, analyze it, validate it, suspend your opinion. Many times I found myself look very foolish because I made the opinion without thinking, only to find out, oops, it was totally wrong. It's classic, right? Somebody calls you, gives you some information, you think it's a fact, and you jump on it, only to realize, oh my God, it's a completely misplaced fact, or it's misunderstood, and this is totally wrong. And Quran says, you know, in ja'akum fasiqun binaba'in fatabayyanu.
Why are kids the best learners? They're empty vessels, and they know that they don't know, so that their beliefs don't get in the way. Well, how do you know you're going to be a follower of the Imam? Is when you're able to forget and suspend your beliefs, and the Imam comes where you won't question them. Now, when somebody gives us advice, we question them. There was a boy that I told him, if you don't change your friends, your environment, your biology, your psychology, your social, your spiritual, you're going to die. Your life is going right there. It's in front of you. And I had a nightmare. I texted the father. I told him, don't take your eyes off your son. And eventually the boy died. I went to that funeral. But you could see it. But even then, that's why the prophets of God suffered the most. And nobody suffered more than the Prophet Muhammad. Because he would see all this. To him, and Hajj, you always explain it, the sin is a huge hole. That's why prophets don't sin. But he would always see people go into the hole, and like, don't you see it? You're suffering. And that's why, and to us, we've had that at a small level, and it's caused huge impacts in my life. Thinking, man, I wish I could have done more. Even recently, you know, with this brother, you know, other people, it leaves this. And I always tell people, you want meaning in life? Learning is, you feel great. Giving, you feel 10 times as great.
See, one of the things that, and this is what I asked you, Sister Barak. I know this conversation, inshallah, will develop it, and I think what you have said is very powerful, both of you, you know, and I think it's important that we build on it, because in a practical sense, one of the things that I've found when a person comes to me with a very negative outlook, it's what we call energy vampires, right? They take the energy away from you.
Life suckers.
Yes, they just suck the life. But here's how I look at it. You know, I was talking to somebody recently who lost a loved one, and you know, they're very angry. You can sense it between their talk, like there's another layer of conversation where they don't tell it to you, but they're sort of angry with God. Why did God allow this to happen? You know, God could have stopped it, right? There's anger. So what that does is it becomes a foundation for pessimism. And once we truly have that belief that, you know, I don't trust God, astaghfirullah, because, you know, I prayed, and it didn't work. You know, Dan Barker is a good example. You know, when I met him, I could tell this guy really, really wants to be good, but he's angry. He's just furious deep down. And it's that fire that percolates that leads us to do all the negatives, sometimes, right? And I found that the best way to diffuse that is that the beauty of reality of life is that we can always say the flip side to everything, pretty much. 99% of everything can be flipped, right? I feel great today. You sure about that? I mean, you don't look great. Boom, you just flipped it. What do you mean? I feel great. Yeah, but you don't look it. I can flip it, right? I believe I exist. Well, I don't think you exist. You're just my dream, You don't really exist. We can flip everything in the reverse. Okay, pretty much 99.9%.
That could be seen potentially as manipulation as well.
No, but we can call it manipulation, but
Right.
actually in academia, opposite ideas is what makes the idea grow.
Right.
So we can call it manipulation, but then are you saying that if you're acquiescing to the idea that you're not manipulating, then maybe you're
it would be the intent of it, I would say, right? The intent of what that influence would be on the person.
So if my idea, if my goal is to manipulate you, and by the way, there's positive manipulation.
Yeah.
We use the word manipulation just like peer pressure. There's positive manipulation.
Influence.
The prophet manipulated the twisted mind back to its straight mind, right? We can use the word manipulation. What I look at
it has a negative connotation. If we want it, let's say in a positive sense, perhaps using the word influence, right? Like a positive influence. It feels better too when you hear the word manipulation, then we get into abuse and
Shaitan influences us all the time.
That's a good twist. That's as an excellent twist.
It was Shaitan who influenced me. We say you know what, you have a friend who's a bad influence.
Right.
Right.
Okay, Haj, you got me there. I was thinking when you do have a client, when you do have somebody who is in that negative space, right? Absolutely, you want to influence them, give them that energy. They're the life suckers, right? They drain you. So there's only so much you can give them. If they're in front of you and they don't want to take that on, you give them the strategies, the coping strategies, eating well, sleeping well, healthy, having positive, not toxic energies around you. There's only so much that you can help somebody, and Brother Hussein can attest to that too. But if that person's not going to take that on, they're a negative influence onto themselves. Just quickly, I remembered Brother Amil was talking about how people envision and whatnot. I can tell you from my experience throughout these years, especially at a university setting, dealing with younger people, those students that came into the clinic with no vision of what they wanted to do after they graduate or didn't know what they wanted to do with their degree are the ones that were most often dealing with depression and these types of thoughts. SubhanAllah. It attests to what we were saying, is that if you don't have a goal, a meaning to go towards, you are most likely little messed up here. And so then we have career services where we connect them with a counselor. And I used to do a lot of that before. And when the student finds the path, their meaning of what they're supposed to be doing, SubhanAllah, it just naturally, those low feelings go away. Now, even if I've seen students who have an end goal of what they want to do, and they come here say, I'm a little messed up about certain things in life. I'm not sure about my thoughts. Again, this is the beautiful age range in their early 20s on, where they're trying to figure out who they are, what their beliefs are. If some people come in, they've had nightmares about death, about family members dying. And so we explore these ideas, and it comes down again, subhanAllah, to faith, religion, and God. And so some students who don't have that structural upbringing with faith, we encourage them, at least depending on the session, I would encourage them, well, why don't you explore different religions? Why don't you explore different meanings of spirituality? Find meaning for yourself. How does this make sense for you? Find something that you connect with. So again, it all comes down to that, the beauty of that connection and faith that they have, or lack of it rather.
And just to add my 2 cents, Imam Ali alayhi salam, 3 different people, same question, but he would build rapport with the people and answer the question differently, even though it's the same to those 3 people. So somebody comes in, for me, pessimistic people are good to throw ideas at. If you have a great idea and you they'll find the holes in it. But right. Pessimistic, Hajj, let's say you come to me, I'm no good, my life stinks, I went bankrupt, I got a disease. Well, what do? You build rapport. Well, I think you're good. I think you could do it. You build that rapport. Or they low voice, man, I don't know what I'm going to do. My wife left. well, guess what? I think there's something that you could do. And that's what the prophets and imams were great at, were building rapport.
Yeah.
And I think that's the first step. Unfortunately, we judge. We don't even try to build rapport because, like you said, Hajj, we don't listen. You always said we have 2 ears, 1 mouth, Hajj. Listen twice as much as we talk. But parents don't want to build rapport with their kids, right? And so therefore they want to put in their beliefs that may be wrong because we have really bad parenting going on, and thus that we have all these problems.
You know what's interesting is sometimes when I find people who are very pessimistic, and it's happened a couple of times and it has worked, is that sometimes their pessimism is their identity.
Right.
And they feel that the resistance they get from people who are optimistic is pleasure to them. It's like somebody who's constantly getting sick and they got a lot of attention, then they made sure they were always sick because it became very addictive, right? And sometimes I find reverse psychology changes it. So when a person comes and says, I'm terrible at, and you look at them and says, okay,
Yep,
alhamdulillah.
you're right.
That's good. That's good.
They want to
And
be
then they
heard.
say,
Yeah.
what do you mean that's good? That's not good. I said, well, I thought it was good because that's why you're saying it. No, that's not good. I remember one person came and said something to me. I said, Alhamdulillah. He said, what do you mean, Alhamdulillah? You're supposed to tell me it's wrong. I said, then why are you telling me it's wrong?
Exactly. And I learned that method from you. And I've practiced. You know what else I do after I do that, Hajj? I also get rid of a limiting belief. Like sometimes they'll come and I'll show them things that they could do that they never thought of. But they'll argue against me, but. And I said, okay, just take this walk for me for 3 days, a week, 40 days, whatever.
Yeah.
Cross that river. And sometimes I'll do a brain, like real quick, where I have them do a deep breath, make them hold their breaths for 2 to 3 minutes. And you ask them before, were you able to hold your breath? They say, no. I said, did you believe you could hold your breath for 2 minutes? They said, we thought it was impossible. Well, how many other things because of your pessimistic outlook have you now negated because you think you can't do that are not true? Because not all your thoughts are true. And that's the work. At the end of the day, even a pessimistic person, even an optimistic person cannot change unless they do the work. That's thus the prayer, the meditations, doing the work. Sister Barak, you were mentioning about, manifesting vision. Look, we put in our calendar. One of the things is to record. If I tell you your dentist, you put on your calendar. If I tell you tomorrow's meeting, calendar, right? But how about your self-development? Is that within your calendar? Your exercise, is that in your calendar? Because if you're not writing it down, then you're telling your body and your subconscious, it's really not that important. And you're always, that pessimistic side is going to always tell you tomorrow.
And you got to do it now. And that's with students, especially, they're complaining to me these days. We're so into procrastinating. We're so lazy. And I'm like, well, you know what? I think all of us during this time of the pandemic are experiencing this trauma that is impacting us. We've never experienced this before. It's a global trauma. Let's give it its validation. At the same time, let's still schedule things in. Let's still do this. I always tell students, put reminders. Put reminders in your phone, whether it's exercise, calling somebody, or doing anything like that. And it is very possible to do that. Somebody just quickly mentioned Sister Annie Shamsi, who's from the UK, and she's a therapist herself, mentioned DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy. And this is something that is therapy that we use, especially with people who have borderline personality disorder, which are highly addictive. They are constantly suicidal, perhaps very depressive, almost bipolar behaviors as well. And so this type of therapy does the flipping. We do that within the therapy, and it's very powerful when we look at changing the script and doing the opposite, like the sister was mentioning here. And that type of flipping, Haja, you mentioned, as the sister also mentioned here, moves the therapy forward as well, right?
It does.
So the
And by the way,
constant negativity, but you flip it, yeah.
From a practical perspective, assuming you have a client, I know that in professionalism, you cannot bring God, religion, and vision. Assuming you're a licensed professional, right? And someone says to you, Sister Barak, you're a professional, a non-Muslim person or even a Muslim person came to you with all these problems, right? And you realize this person is a zealot in pessimism, and you felt, okay, well, let me just bring God into the equation. Let me bring religion into the equation. Let me give them vision of the day of judgment, right? And assuming somebody highlights and says, okay, that's not professional. No. You're not becoming more of a preacher. You're becoming more of a spiritual guide.
Yeah, we don't do that, no.
I mean, from a practical, pragmatic position, the way I look at it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is I take the paradigm of religion. What is religion in its purest form? Eternity. Eternity is religion. To me, eternity is religion. The minute you understand the principles of eternity, all the pieces of the puzzle start to fall into place. I always say when you do something good, you have to have eternity in the thought of the good. Otherwise, it's not good anymore.
Right.
And religion is all about doing good, but good that is really good, the one that God sanctioned, right? But you have to have eternity into the equation. A person comes and says, I don't have eternity. Or if there is, I don't know how to look at it. So therefore, don't talk to me about religion. I'm paraphrasing here, right? The way I look at it is that same paradigm of time factors, I chop it into parts and I give this person a piece of eternity and say, here, go do this. And I'm giving you a time frame.
Right.
Do it in a week, a month, 6 months, 5 years, 10 years, 50, whatever. Reach it. That person has an end goal to it. Of course, it doesn't have the totality of good qualities, but it's a piece of the eternal. So, for example, somebody comes and says, "I'm very pessimistic. I lost my job. Things are not going well. I want to die." I said, "Okay, how about we do a small little thing, and you know this person can probably achieve it within a short span of time." That becomes an incubator for another rotation. You accomplished that. You see, that's not bad. Oh yeah, you know what? I'm not that bad, am I? I mean, I really thought I was a classic loser. Everything for me was negative. Oh wow, I did achieve that. Okay, now how about you achieve the next level? And what ends up happening is now you're aligning that eternity into their vision, but you're looking at it more at part based.
And you
Many
could
times
also,
when we talk about religion, we talk about an eternal journey, and everything is like holistic.
you could also flip that, Hajj, where when somebody comes to you, you could remind them of their past wins. That's what the Quran did. When
Good
the people
point.
of Musa came and they crossed the river, they were complaining, they were pessimistic. We have no food, we have no water to Musa. So then Musa had to give a khutbah commanded by God, reminding them, I just freed you. Your kids were being killed. What's wrong with you? Like when a teacher will come to me, I'm so stupid.
Yeah.
And you say, well, what about 2 weeks ago when you had this? Oh yeah. So you notice these thoughts are just not
They're
true.
cognitive distortions, right?
Yep.
And so we constantly have to work on reframing that narrative, right? And there is a really great tool if we're talking practicality and devoid of God, let's say in the conversation with somebody who doesn't believe in that eternity, then we can look at step by step. And it's by Dr. David Burns, who's the guru of anxiety. And he has this really great tool called the Daily Thought Record. And this can be used from a spiritual religious point of view. And I have used that with clients who have that background. I try to use this in my own daily practice of gratitude as well, inshallah. And so with the client, let's say, who is not using the schema of religion, then we can look at it this way. So you're putting yourself down and you look at these cognitive distortions, such as making feelings facts, blaming, personalizing, catastrophizing. These are all the things that a pessimist would come into, right? So we would look at these distortions and people connect with that right away. I would say things like, does this sound familiar? They're like, yeah, that's me. And then, all right, let's keep going. And so let's look at the Daily Thought Record. This is a great tool that you can apply where you look at an event or something. So loss of a job, or you failed a test, or a marriage that was whatever negative situation, fill in the blanks, and writing it out also helps ingrains it in here. They can write this out daily, but then it eventually becomes part of their language. So looking at the negative impact, all right, how it makes you feel, the event, how it makes you feel. So anxious, depressed, hopeless, despair, anything negative there. And then you rate that out of 10. So usually it's high up there. When a negative situation happens to any of us, our intense feelings are right up there. So then what David Burns says is, okay, now write down all of the negative thoughts. You are allowed to, in other words, crap on yourself. And I always try to bring humor into therapy, and I'll use words like that to lighten up the mood. And so people here are allowed to say negative things. I'm a loser. Oh, they think I'm such a this, I'm such a that. This is the only time you're allowed to say that. Go for it. Let it all out. Cathartic, right? Let it all out. Afterwards, we rate how much we believe this. How believable is this feeling? Then we label it with these 13 distortions that we go through here. And also there's a workbook that I use, the self-esteem workbook, where this model is used. And the author there, if anyone's interested, is David Shiraldi, and he uses this method as well. So then you rate how believable is this negative thought about yourself. Then we label it. We label it with these distortions. Now we have a name to something that we believe so negative about ourselves. And this is the beautiful part now where we flip it. Like we were saying here, you now flip it with something more reasonable. Talk back to yourself with something more reasonable. I'm a loser. No, I'm not a loser. I just tripped and I looked funny. You know, I'll laugh at myself. I'm not a loser for tripping or breaking this or whatever it is. We talk back to our negative thought. We are changing now and flipping the narrative, right? So then we go back to the initial thought. How much do we believe that after seeing how much we believed the positive thought? What happens now? Hopefully, the intensity of that belief goes down. And then when we look at the emotion to the event, hopefully that emotion has gone down as well. So you see the beauty of this model, that we take an event, look at the feeling, rate it, look at the negative thought that happens, label it with what cognitive distortion we have, talk back to it and re-rate the thought and the emotion. And this is how we can change. So if I have a negative client, Haj Hassanain, in front of me and challenging me with this pessimism, I would potentially work with that client outside of God here to work practically through that. Chances are that this person is going to think something positive about themselves or include a little bit of humor, maybe not in one session, maybe a few sessions. Now, this is something beautiful that we can use while being God conscious as well, in terms of gratitude and not being so hard on ourselves.
I want to
One
add
quick, I just want to mention, brother, you can, brother,
Go
go ahead,
ahead, jump in
after.
really
There's
quick.
a lot with this one.
Just really as a sidebar, as a plea to everybody that's listening. If you go to a psychiatrist and the psychiatrist isn't doing what Sister Barak is telling, some of the examples, there's a problem. What's happening is suicide is the #1 killer between the ages of 10 to 30. It's now become #1. Why? You go to a psychiatrist, you're sad, and if you have low dopamine, but they're giving you extra serotonin, or you have low serotonin, but they're giving you extra dopamine because they're not looking, they're not asking the right questions, they're going to basically kill you. Thus, other than other things, that's why Dr. Daniel Amen, lead psychiatrist, he looks at the brain. He sees where's the imbalance. He says, if you have a broken arm, you look before you put a cast. If you have a broken brain, we don't look. It's insane. But that's why I encourage people. I've sent people to his clinic, their lives have changed. But exactly what Sister Barak said. If your psychiatrist isn't doing those things,
just
run.
give you pills. That's not how it works.
Run. They're giving 10, 20 benzos for all their clients throughout their day, serving 20, 30 clients to get paid. It's a failing practice because it's the same thing that they've done 100 years ago. It doesn't work. Evidence shows.
One thing I just wanted to mention before we, one thing I just wanted to mention before we, inshallah, we also start to wrap up the program is, we're talking a lot about, how you're talking about Sister Barak, how you console clients, Brother Hussein, you brought about an interesting point about, reminding people of their small wins. And I think one beautiful example from the Quran is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala consoles the Prophet, right? If you look at Surah Al-Duha, they say Surah Al-Duha was revealed when the Prophet, was feeling a little bit down because, the idolaters of Mecca would constantly bug him and mock him and say, your God has forsaken you. And I think it's beautiful the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tries to console his own Prophet in the Quran. Allah, it begins, he swears, وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. And then Allah reminds him, مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَالَ, that your Lord has not forsaken you, nor has he become displeased. This is one problem, right? A lot of times we think, oh, God has forsaken me. I don't see him in my life, so I think he's forsaken me. But Allah repeatedly mentions, لَا تَقْنَطُ مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ, right? The same way, you mentioned, Brother Hussein, also the story of Nabi Musa alayhi salam. When they were fleeing from Fir'aun, and they were running towards the river and the army of Pharaoh was behind them. It's beautiful. Allah portrays a scene in the Quran that the people that were with Musa, they began to say that, inna lamudrakun, that surely we're going to be, overtaken. But the conviction of Musa, who knew Allah was always with him, he says, qala kalla inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdin, that nay, never. My Lord is with me and he shall guide me. So the first thing, it's beautiful. Allah tells the Prophet, he reminds him that, your Lord has not forsaken you and he has not displeased with you. The first principle Allah introduces is always remember God is with you. And then number 2, Allah reminds him of eternity. Brother saying you brought up Day of Judgment. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. That the hereafter, the Day of Judgment, right? Paradise is better for you than what this first life. So he reminds him, number 2, of hereafter, Day of Judgment. And he tells him, وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. And soon your Lord shall give you and you shall be pleased. So he's reminding you might be going through temporary struggle, temporary hardship, but remember, God is with you. The hereafter is coming soon and you shall be pleased. And Brother Hussein, you brought up about small wins. Then Allah reminds the Prophet, Alam yajidka yatiman
Exactly.
fa'awa? Did we not find you an orphan and then we clothed you?
Right.
وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. So Allah is reminding the Prophet, it's beautiful how the Quran lays out all of these principles we were just talking about, that Allah reminds the Prophet, keep me in your picture. I have not forsaken you. Keep eternity hereafter in the picture. You shall soon be pleased, right? And then he reminds him of the past. Did God not help you in the past? So have faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help you, right? And beautiful one point I will mention, inshallah, before we start to conclude and wrap up the program is, Sister Brog, something you mentioned about how you notice that when you deal with students, the ones that are most successful you find are those who have a vision of what they want to be in the future. And just a personal short story to share. The first day I started to work at Facebook, we had this vice president coming to speak to us, and I've shared this story before, but I thought it was very profound. Where he comes in and someone raises their hand and they ask him, someone who's a vice president who's very successful, what is one indicator of success that you find? And people that become successful in their careers, what is one indicator of success? And so this vice president shares that in my experience, when I interview people, usually when you go for these interviews at technology companies, they're asking you very technical questions on programming and engineering, et cetera, et cetera. But he says, I like to ask people a question to throw them off to see what their vision is. And he says, the question I've found that has given me the best indicator of if a person will be successful at the company or not is I ask someone, why do you wake up every day and what do you want to achieve? What is your meaning, right? This is a simple question. I just remember that hadith Imam alayhi salam, that answer for yourself, what is my meaning? What am I working towards? And it was amazing to hear just, some of the conversations that took place in the crowd, after the program. People were thinking about this question he posed, and people were like, why do I wake up every day, to do laundry, to get up? This is what I want to accomplish. People have because they don't have that eternity in picture, they don't have that long-term vision, they fail to, wake up every day happy, energetic. So the most successful people, it's a principle, we always say the principles of the Quran are universal principles. Even if you're not a Muslim, you can fall in line and grasp those principles. That's why Imam alayhi salam used to advise on his deathbed, he advised that beware that others do not excel you in acting in accordance with the principles of the Quran. Meaning others can also excel you, despite the fact that you have the Quran, others can excel you in acting in accordance to its principles if you're not vigilant and you don't pay heed to its principles. I know we're very well over time, so I want to, inshallah, start wrapping up the program. Inshallah, we'll start sharing some, final brief concluding remarks before we start to conclude the program. Brother Hussein, please.
That ayah that you brought, duha, that's what I do counseling with. You not only does it for the hereafter, what's to come in your future is also going to be better. Because Shaykh Bahman Moore talks about it. It just doesn't mean the hereafter. It's also about your future in this reality. See, to me, I talked about that person who envisioned Cadillac. It came, he did the work. That person can never go back to the old lifestyle. And I think that's the key for people, is to do it, see that you are in complete control of your reality, that you don't need anybody. And Allah says it's going to come in the most unexpected way. If you read Surah Talaq, the third ayah, says it's coming unexpected. People who despair say, how am I going to leave my abusive husband? Where am I going to get money from? Allah says it's going to come unexpected. Go. We're going to help you. But that fear holds us back. And I believe, just like that brother and other people that we've helped, as soon as they do the work and they see that reality, you can't go back to your old self. As soon as you take 30 seconds of your day, 3 minutes, you envision something, you tie an emotion to it. 2 days later, it comes a reality. You say, whoa, because I don't believe in cause and the effect of matter. I believe causing the effect. That's the way the Prophet ﷺ taught us. And I believe just as long as you take that river of change, across that river, watch what happens. As soon as people do that, you can't go back to the old you because that person doesn't exist. But what are the suggestions of doing that? Forgive people, let go of bad habits, and figure out what your why is. Your why is so pivotal. Why are you doing it? Why is it important? Where am I going? Ask those fundamental questions. And as a quick footnote, our brain lasts for about 40 minutes. Even in this discussion, anything after 40 minutes, you're not going to retain. So what do? You listen to it for 25 minutes, you hit pause, and you write down, how is this useful? What did I just learn? Or else you're going to forget it in a day. People say, did you like that lecture? Oh yeah, this was an amazing lecture. What was it? Because Hajj first time I listened to Hajj's lecture, it was like the 5th lecture. Says, I said, man, Hajj, that was beautiful. So what did I speak about? Forgot. And that was the reason. Sometimes your brain shuts off. And so what you do is take 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break, you write it down. We know cramming doesn't work, and so on. So that's a really important tool as well.
Sister Barak, if you want to share any final brief thoughts before Hassanain, inshallah, wraps up the program.
I feel like we've steered off from the initial topic
Yes.
of how to deal with post-Shahr Ramadan blues, but it's so motivating hearing all of these things in terms of how we take care of ourselves, our well-being, and our spirituality. And that's a year-long process. It's not just during the holy month. It's like so nutrient rich during, let's say, this holy month to do all of these things, but how do we spread that out throughout the whole year? And it's with these beautiful strategies that we've kind of gone over, whether it's from a therapeutic point of view or from practical day-to-day point of view. So it is about finding meaning in your actions, finding meaning daily, finding meaning in long term, and looking at your goals and what you want to accomplish. And also the gratitude. I know we just barely touched upon that, but I find that is so important in terms of exploring gratitude. And we've seen this in studies, and even I can attest to it for Carleton University. I forget the name of the professor, I should know, I forget, but he does research on happiness. And what he has found is that even when people just remember, and I attended a webinar a few weeks ago where he was talking about the people who just did a few moments of gratitude in the morning and at the end of the day. Imagine you start your day with that gratitude of what you are happy about and just being thankful for, how that energy just creates your day, so to speak. And at the end of the day, reminiscing of what you were grateful for. It could be something simple, such as, Alhamdulillah, I have clean sheets to sleep on tonight. Something very simple. Alhamdulillah, I had that mango I was craving all day. Alhamdulillah, I was able to donate. Alhamdulillah, you know what? I finished this chapter. It could be something huge. It could be something small, very small. But what it does, it creates positive emotions. Imagine going to bed with this kind of positive emotion, but also let's say you include a dua or something when we continue our spirituality. Find something that you really connected with during the holy month that you can continue. As Sayyid Hassan Mekki was saying the other day, it really impacted me that you can continue, because I'm a big believer in routine, and we try to help clients create healthy routines, whether it's eating, sleeping, exercise, spirituality, getting rid of toxic energy in people, and creating that for minimum at least 2 to 3 weeks. Because what we find between 2 to 3 weeks, around 21 days, this is now developing into a habit. It could be a good or bad habit. Imagine if you continue, because the number 40 from a spiritual religious point of view for us is huge for us. So imagine you continue from 21 to 40 days and beyond. That now becomes a habit for you. I have personally, what I have done this holy month that I haven't done before diligently is during my salah for the qanut dua al-hujjah, I am guaranteeing that I say it daily. And I find that something so simple. And I learned from another sheikh, always be, and we know this, always be in a state of wudu. But then now it's become a habit for me. And now I'm constantly feeling, even before I go to bed, doing that wudu, because I did it during this holy month. I've now continued it. So it could be something really small that you can continue, finding meaning for yourself, gratitude, like we were saying. And if you do want to do some therapeutic practices, you can contact me and I'll refer you to some therapists that can help you, inshallah, if you are stuck on something, or if you were being like a negative Hajj client over here.
Sister Barak, you brought up about gratitude, and I think it's beautiful. The Quran shares that universal principle, وَإِذْ تَأَذَّنَ رَبُّكُمْ لَإِنْ شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَإِنْ كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ, that Allah has decreed, meaning has put down a universal principle. If you are grateful, He will give you more.
Exactly.
And if you're ungrateful, then surely His punishment is severe, because you haven't taken account for all that God has given you. And this principle of gratitude, sometimes we have a very linear thinking that, if I'm thankful, God will, come in and give me more. And of course, God is the cause behind everything, but this is the system that Allah has placed in, which operates, that even a non-believer, right? Even if someone hypothetically doesn't believe in God, if they're grateful, they will receive more. Why? Because they will see the cup as half empty. It's the mindset. They'll see how much they've been given, so they will work to fulfilling the rest of the cup and not work towards emptying the rest of the cup. But inshallah, Hassanain, you will conclude on this note.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, thank you. We're out of time. It's almost, in about 2 minutes, it'll be prayer time. At least for our zone, I know for other places, it's probably Fajr time or whatever, for you. I know it's past your prayer time, but this was a beautiful dialogue. So just let's wrap it up. As we mentioned, actually, when we talk about maintaining spirituality, we need to talk about those blues, quote unquote, that cause us to be pessimistic, right? We need to look at life in a very positive light. And as Brother Amil just mentioned, even if you don't believe in God, the law of nature, the fitrat Allah allati fatara an-nasa alayha, is a natural phenomena. So I think we need to be that way. And the reason I posed some of these questions to, for example, to you, Sister Barak, is that I want the world to understand that we can be very positive in outlooks. And people may say, well, that's quote unquote manipulation, that's quote unquote influencing, right? But that is an objective. We must influence each other. We must manipulate each other in a positive way. We are accessories to the growth of the society. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold on together. What does that mean? I see you as myself. I see the world as myself. So I need to affect that, but in a positive way, not in a proselytizing and forcing way, right? And I believe it's all about impressions. So I conclude on this, and inshallah we'll continue this dialogue next Thursday. It's about impressions. If you look at Hollywood, if you look at the professional industry, it was right before this presentation, I met with some experts, in media and cameras and high-tech materials, right? And I'm talking to them, and they're talking about these various cameras and technologies and 4K and blah, blah, blah. And I'm asking them, why is this important? I said, when I look at this video, there's a very minor difference. They would look at you and said, no, it's the impression. It's very powerful. If you ever look at the top quality Hollywood movies that really make it, they have stuff that they've added in there that changes the perspectives. The average Joe Schmo doesn't know that, but it's coming to them in this extremely pleasant environment because somebody's done deep research and work to figure out the psychology and the visuals of how the world likes to look at things. And they're out there presenting it in a masterful way where you're actually experiencing something 3D when it's actually just linear. In other words, it's just being streamed. What I'm trying to say is it's a world of impressions. And when we want to maintain our spirituality towards Allah, there is a reality. And if a human being truly is real in their touch, they will be talking to God naturally. Many of us go away from Allah because we have been misinformed by groups of mastery in impressions. When Iblis says, فَبِعِزَّتِكَ لَأُغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ, I'm going to beguile them. What is the modus operandi of Iblis? To create impressions, false impressions, to create this fantasy, blur the lines, have this person think wrong. Let me take them there. But God has created the same system by which a believer can also use to take people towards Allah. The messengers in the Quran has a mastery of realigning that vision. If you look at Quran, it's full of visions. It's talking to me about visions, but it's real visions. It's real. It's not fabricated. You and I, as believers, when we talk about Thursday night dua, when we shed tears, when we cry, when we go into ruku, just this, kunut. Imagine you see a picture of somebody. You're walking in the airport and you see somebody in the corner doing this. You walked by, split second, you saw them do this. You know what kind of impression that has given you? Incredible. For a split second, you're reminded of God. That's why hijab is such a powerful tool. This hijab that women wear, to me, it's the most powerful flag I've ever seen. I swear. Prayer is the most powerful movement I've ever seen. And every time I think about it, I say, if I was a non-believer, this would be phenomenal. Sitting together, making dua. So I just want to end with this, that let's not give up on our spirituality. Ramadan was a heavy dose of spirituality, inshallah. Now it must resonate. As Imam Khomeini said, prayer begins when it ends. Let Ramadan begin when it ends. That's my sincere advice to us all. And be cognizant, be aware. Look around. The talk of God is constant. I remember one time I was in Medina and something incredible happened to me. I went for Fajr Salah. As soon as I'm done with Salah, people gather, and a group of youth came in. They were all dressed in white dishdasha. They were wearing, the headgear, right? And they all walked in with their Quran, and they all sat around. They had a marfa, and there were about 30, 40 of them. And I sat there on the side watching them, and each one was reading a verse, a second verse. So I started to cry. I said, I don't have that in America. This community in Medina has it natural. Quran recitation is natural for them because the environment has created that very strong environment. I don't have that. I started to cry. I was so impressed with that vision. It hasn't left me. Okay. And I got on the plane and I was crying. And something told me, if you are really impressed by this, why don't you make one? You don't have to go to Medina to get it. How about you make one in New York? You know, we started that Hifz class in New York, and we had a small group, and Amil was part of that. And we used to sit in a big circle, and we would read surahs of Quran, and we memorized so many surahs. And I remember every one of us after Sunday program, we all go down after eating, we'd all go down it grew to about 50 kids. And we would all sit in a circle, and each one would recite an ayah until we finished the whole surah. And I remember I was crying. I said, that one impression in Medina affected me so much that the impact of that today is enabling us to actually have this international global dialogue. And we're quoting Quranic verses with a relative amount of ease only because of that one impression that affected me so much, besides the collection of other impressions, of course, you know, parental impressions and so on. But the moral of the story is you and I should impress upon each other positive trajectories. So if I was a client who came to Sister Barak, you don't have to say anything. I know you're professional, but just your demeanor and your eye, you know, the way you intonate and the way you move could be a stronger impression to me as a client that I can walk away, just like Brother Hussein said, a 1-hour lecture, you may not hear anything, but the impression was so powerful that you're driven in that direction. 10 years or 5 years down the line, you'll listen to that same lecture and say, oh my God, I remember that. Yes, I heard that. But now you're analyzing it. But you're here. How did you get here? Well, that lecture pushed you here, but you didn't know why it pushed you here. Now you can analyze it in the past. So let's conclude on that and say that, you know, oh Allah, give us this tawfiq by which to recognize this great mercy that you've given us. And that when we do talk about issues, it's all about the power of impressions. And by the way, one final point, you and I cannot fudge impressions. We cannot fool people. We can only fool them for a short while. But when you and I have certainty in our hearts, and we truly believe in the divine, and we truly believe in his mercy, you don't have to say much. The world acknowledges that. So I end with that. Let's just exude that enormous mercy God has given us. Let's talk about it. Let's invite people towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that each subsequent day becomes even stronger. And as Sister Barak mentioned beautifully, you know, Hajj Hussein Makki, may Allah bless him, is a fantastic, fantastic role model for our community. That each one of us, when we examine those 40 days, it's exactly what is 40 days. Analyze, put yourself in the routine, and let it become a habit, where it becomes not only habit, but it becomes your essence. We'll talk about the 40 days some other time, inshallah. May Allah give us the tawfiq, inshallah. We'll end with a short dua, and then we will play dua kumail for those of you who wish to listen to it. And we'll be doing a lot of live sessions, live, you know, recitations too, live dua programs on this station too. So I know it's recorded, people can hear it too.
People were asking for the programs I could see here. So Thursday nights, there are programs, Friday as well as Saturday.
And each one will be different. So each one will have a different kind of discussion. And the venues will change slightly. So we may not have this 4-person dialogue. It may be, you know, a setting where we're on a couch and we're talking, and, you know, we're still experimenting. We know some strategies on this, but we want to impress the beauty of this religion in various ways. And inshallah, with your support and your participation, inshallah, we'll get there shortly. I want to thank you all. Brother Hussein, may Allah bless you for your, you know, for your passion. And Sister Barak, really, it's truly an honor to have you as always. You know, your professionalism, your spirit, your deen is truly gratifying. Brother Amil, we're very, very pleased to have you with us. You know, I see you as that, as I always say, a bridge, as a conduit, as a role model for the next generation. You have a lot on your shoulders. You will continue to grow, inshallah. And I hope the world resonates through you, and I'm already seeing that. A lot of people are making very positive comments. Let's take this gift Allah has given us, and let's take it to fruition till the next world, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Rabbana ighfir lana wa li ikhwanina alladhina sabaquna bil iman wa la taj'al fi qulubina ghillan lil ladhina amanu rabbana innaka ra'ufur rahim. Wa akhir ad-da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salam.